the kingdom that defied the ocean. The echo of England's victory over the invincible armada did not remain in the 16th century. It reverberated across the ages, shaping the identity of a people and the destiny of an island that would transform into an empire. From that confrontation, England understood that its strength did not lie in land armies or vast continental borders, but in its ability to master the ocean. The sea ceased to be a barrier and became a heritage forged in courage, cunning, and also in blood. In the centuries that followed, every English sail unfurled across the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, or the Pacific carried the memory of 1588. The belief that the ocean could be conquered, that storms could be navigated, and that colossal empires could be defied became rooted in the nation's heart. The triumph over Spain was the prelude to an expansion that would raise the English flag across all continents. The kingdom that defied the ocean became the empire upon which the sun never set. But this legacy is not only glory, it is also shadow. The roots that brought wealth and power also carried slavery, the destruction of cultures, the exploitation of peoples, and the burden of a dominion built upon chains. England projected its greatness across seas and foreign lands, but left behind scars that still mark the memory of conquered nations. The ocean was the stage of heroic deeds, but also of countless human tragedies, and yet there is something undeniable. The courage of a small island that, facing greater enemies, dared not surrender. The spirit of resistance, the ability to turn weakness into strength, and to transform the sea into an ally, are marks that endured through history and live on today. Every ship that departs from England's modern ports is a direct heir to that epic decision to confront the impossible. The ocean, both witness and judge, still holds the roar of battles, the lament of the lost and the cry of the victorious. It reminds us that all glory has a price, that every conquest carries wounds. The kingdom that defied the ocean left the world with an eternal lesson. Greatness never comes without sacrifice, and every empire must hear, in the waves, the warning of its own destiny. The 16th century rose as an age of brutal transformations. Europe burned in wars of religion, the gold of the Americas fed hungry empires, and the seas ceased to be mere frontiers, becoming the highways of human ambition. At the heart of this convulsed scenario, England was still searching for its identity. Small in territory, divided by dynastic disputes and the tension between Catholics and Protestants, it was seen by the great empires as a peripheral island, lacking the strength to shape the destiny of the world. Yet within its ports, in its taverns, and in the dreams of its navigators, an unrest impossible to silence was born. Why remain in the shadows while Spain and Portugal built empires beyond the ocean? Spanish dominance seemed absolute. Ships laden with gold, silver, and spices crossed the Atlantic like rivers of power, financing wars and crowning Spain as the greatest power of Christendom. Portugal, discreet yet efficient, had already traced its roots to the Indies and monopolized spices worth more than gold. England watched, powerless, as the seas became the stage of Iberian glory. But every Spanish galleon that appeared on the horizon was also a provocation, a reminder that wealth and power lay just beyond the mist that covered the channel. Within the kingdom, crises ran deep. The Reformation had torn apart families, cities, and even the crown itself. The execution of Mary Stuart and the rise of Elizabeth I revealed that England was ready to pay any price for its religious and political sovereignty. And in this climate of tension, maritime expansion became more than ambition, it became survival. If Spain was the sword of Catholicism, then England would be the bastion of Protestantism, and the sea would be the battlefield where this rivalry would be decided. The first English explorers were not immaculate heroes, but men driven by a mixture of courage and desperation. John Cabot, Francis Drake, Walter Raleigh, names that would echo through history, emerged as symbols of a nation that dared to cross into the unknown. They did not yet possess the naval power of the Spaniards, but they held something that gold could not buy, the determination to refuse the role of mere spectator. Each expedition was an act of rebellion against the established world order, a spark of pride that ignited the imagination of an entire people. Thus, in the clash between faith and power, between wealth and survival, the English maritime impulse was born. The ocean ceased to be only a threat. It became the promise of greatness. England, pressed by rivals and wounded by its own divisions, discovered that its salvation did not lie in retreat, but in advance. And in the sway of the waves, the empire was born that would transform not only Europe, but the entire known world. England's awakening before the ocean was neither immediate nor glorious. It was slow, painful, and marked by defeats. Yet, like iron tempered in fire, each loss at sea forged a new generation of navigators. It was the beginning of a transformation, from a hesitant nation into a people shaped by the waves. On the docks of London and Bristol, men crowded into fragile vessels, driven by dreams of fortune and the promise of immortality. These journeys were not mere adventures. They were wages of life and death. Many never returned, swallowed by storms or starved in the vastness of the sea. Still, for every shipwreck, new ships were built. For every sailor lost, another would rise to take his place. John Cabot was among the first to dream boldly, believing he could reach the rich lands of the East by sailing westward. His voyages opened the doors to a collective imagination. If Spain and Portugal already had their roots, then England too must find its path. Later, names like Francis Drake and Walter Raleigh emerged, not as mere navigators, but as warriors of the seas. Drake, the feared privateer, struck at Spanish galleons, turning plunder into a political weapon and fuel for the crown. Raleigh in turn carried forward the vision of permanent colonies, sowing the first seeds of English presence in the New World. These men were no saints. They were ambitious, brutal, often merciless, but in their deeds, they carried the weight of a nation's destiny. England came to understand that its survival depended on mastery of the sea. Isolated on the continent, threatened by powerful enemies, it could not hope to triumph on land. The sea would be its trench, its invisible fortress, its path to expansion. Thus began the investments in building a sturdier navy, designed not only for defense, but for attack. Each ship constructed was like a sword raised against the Spanish Empire. Each expedition became a cry of defiance. It was not merely about glory or wealth, it was about faith. England saw itself as the bastion of Protestantism, the chosen nation to confront Spanish Catholicism. The voyages, therefore, carried the weight of a spiritual war. Crossing the ocean was portrayed as a modern crusade, and every naval victory was celebrated not only as military triumph, but as a sign of divine will. In this cauldron of ambition, rivalry, and religious fervor, England consolidated its rise. The ocean, once regarded as a barrier, had become part of the national identity. And when English sails began to spread across the Atlantic, the world understood that a new power was emerging. Small on land, yet infinite in determination, England prepared itself for its decisive confrontation, the one that would transform it from a threatened kingdom into a rising empire. The year was 1588. The fate of England and the balance of all Europe would be decided not on battlefields, but upon the open sea, where wind, gunpowder, and courage would dictate the future. Philip II of Spain, lord of vast dominions and heir to empires overflowing with gold, resolved to crush England once and for all. The plan was audacious: unleash the greatest fleet ever assembled, the dreaded Invincible Armada, to invade the island and restore the Catholic faith. Spain was not merely attacking a rival, it sought to extinguish a religious rebellion, to suffocate a nation daring to challenge Iberian power, and to destroy the young queen who had become a symbol of resistance. Elizabeth I's Spanish ports seethed with activity. More than 130 ships, some massive war galleons, others crammed with soldiers, weapons, and supplies, stretched into an endless line across the horizon. The sight of the Armada was almost mythical, a wall of wood, iron, and sail advancing like a living storm. To many, it seemed impossible to stop. Its very name, Invincible, carried the promise that no earthly force could resist it. On the other side, England trembled, but did not bow. At Tilbury, before her troops, Queen Elizabeth delivered words that would echo through eternity. "I have the body of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England." It was more than a speech. It was the voice of an entire nation that, poor in resources, found strength in determination. England was ready to fight to its last breath. When the fleets finally clashed, the sea became a vision of hell. Cannons thundered like storms, smoke veiled the sky, and ships collided in deadly maneuvers. The English, with smaller and more agile vessels, harnessed the wind and speed to strike in circles, slashing and retreating before the heavy Spanish galleons could respond. It was the dance of the fox against the bull, cunning against brute force. Then came the unexpected blow. The English unleashed fireships upon the anchored Spanish fleet. Flames lit the night as though the heavens themselves had fallen ablaze. Panic spread. Ships collided, ropes snapped, and what had been an imposing formation dissolved into utter chaos. The Invincible Armada was no longer invincible, yet it was not only the English who decided the battle. The ocean itself became an ally. Violent storms lashed the Spanish fleet, scattering ships and wrecking dozens more. The survivors, starving and exhausted, returned in defeat. The myth had fallen. England's victory was not merely military. It was spiritual, symbolic, almost divine. A small kingdom had faced a giant and prevailed. From that moment, the sea ceased to be a threat. It became the stage of English glory, and in the heart of the waves, the destiny of an empire was born, one that would stretch across centuries. The victory over the Invincible Armada in 1588 was celebrated as a miracle, a divine intervention that had saved England from destruction. But behind the glory there were deep wounds. Every triumph carries with it a hidden price, and the sea, so generous in offering victories, was equally relentless in demanding payment. English ports echoed with pride, yet also with the laments of families who would never see their sailors return. For every ship that came home victorious, another had been lost to treacherous waters, leaving behind only silence and absence. The naval triumph gave England new breath, but it did not erase its fragilities. The economy remained weak, dependent on plunder, and a commercial network still in its infancy. Stolen Spanish gold filled the coffers temporarily, but it did not create lasting stability. Ordinary people saw little of the wealth that flowed to the crown. For many, life continued marked by hunger, disease, and the weight of inequality. Thus, while the nobility celebrated victories, peasants still fought against misery. Moreover, the conflict was far from over. Victory against Spain did not bring immediate peace, but rather a cycle of wars and reprisals. Every English strike against Spanish galleons was met with new invasion attempts, and the waters of the Atlantic became the stage of an endless war. Piracy, blockades, and naval battles became routine, and the seas, already perilous by nature, grew even bloodier. The first English colonies in the Americas also revealed the darker side of this drive for expansion. The promise of riches and fertile lands soon gave way to the harsh reality of hunger, tropical diseases, and violent clashes with native peoples who resisted foreign invasion. The colony of Roanoke vanished mysteriously, a brutal reminder that conquest would not be easy. For every new English flag planted on American soil, dozens of lives were claimed by nature, by war, or by sheer neglect. Slavery, introduced into English roots at the end of the 16th century, was another price paid. The trade in human lives became part of the machinery of maritime power. Ships that once carried dreams of glory now carried chains and prisoners, turning the ocean into a graveyard for thousands of Africans torn from their homelands. The English Empire was born not only of courage and daring, but also of pain and oppression. Thus, the victory over the Invincible Armada brought England not a glorious end, but the beginning of a new struggle. The small island had proven to the world that it could resist the mightiest empire of the age, but it now faced another challenge: sustaining the greatness it had won without being consumed by its own contradictions. The sea would remain a source of power, but also of tragedy. By casting itself into the ocean, England discovered that triumph always carried shadows, and that every wave of glory left behind a trail of mourning. The echo of England's victory over the Invincible Armada in 1588 was not confined to the 16th century. It reverberated through the ages, shaping the identity of a people and the destiny of an island that would transform into an empire. England understood from that confrontation that its true power did not rest in land armies or vast continental borders, but in the mastery of the ocean. The sea ceased to be a barrier and became a legacy forged in courage, in cunning, and also in blood. In the centuries that followed, every English sail that unfurled across the Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, or the Pacific carried with it the memory of 1588. The conviction that the ocean could be conquered, that storms could be navigated, and that colossal empires could be defied became rooted in the nation's heart. The triumph over Spain was the prelude to an expansion that would plant the English flag on every continent. The kingdom that defied the ocean became the empire upon which the sun never set. Yet this legacy is not only one of glory, it is also one of shadow. The roots that carried wealth and power also carried slavery, the destruction of cultures, the exploitation of peoples, and the burden of dominion built upon chains. England projected its greatness across seas and foreign lands, but left behind scars that still mark the memory of conquered nations. The ocean was the stage of heroic deeds, but also of countless human tragedies. And yet something remains undeniable: the courage of a small island that, in the face of greater enemies, dared not to surrender. The spirit of resistance, the ability to turn weakness into strength and to transform the sea into an ally, are marks that endured through history and remain alive today. Every ship that departs from modern English ports is a direct heir to that epic decision to confront the impossible. The ocean, both witness and judge, still holds the roar of battles, the lament of the lost and the cry of the victorious. It reminds us that all glory has a price, that every conquest leaves wounds. The kingdom that defied the ocean left the world an eternal lesson. Greatness never comes without sacrifice, and every empire must hear in the waves the warning of its own destiny.